The sunny morning in the heart of the city looked deceptively peaceful. Jeremy, with a smile on his face, walked into the bank, unaware that his day was about to turn into a nightmare. He just wanted to open a new account, but what happened next left him in shock. The racist manager, with an evil grin, began to humiliate him, making fun of him in front of other customers. Every question, every comment from the manager cut like a knife to the heart. Jeremy felt his pride and dignity crumbling before his eyes. "How dare you come here?" His insulting words came out like a bolt from the blue. Jeremy stood there in confusion, not believing that such a thing was possible in the 21st century. Anger and humiliation filled his soul, but he knew that this time he would not simply leave silently. The next day he returned to the bank, but now his face was determined. He was not looking for revenge, but an inner flame of pride burned in his heart. No matter how difficult the situation, he knew that his time had come. And now, dear viewers, we want to know about you. Write in the comments what your name is and where you are watching this video from. You are very important to us, and your support helps promote our channel. Every message, every like and subscription gives us strength to do more and better. You are part of our team, and we value you more than ever. Let's make the world a better place together, starting with the fight against bias and injustice. Enjoy watching. Jeremy walked down the street, unaware that his ordinary day was about to turn into a nightmare. Sunlight was breaking through the clouds, but there was a tension in the air, like the silence before a storm. When he entered the bank, his confidence quickly dissipated. The smooth marble floors and bright lights could not hide the hostile glances that were directed at him, as if he were an alien in an unfamiliar world. He walked up to the counter where the manager sat at a computer, a tall man with a hard face and cold, ruthless eyes. It was Mr. Phillips, known in the area for his bias. Jeremy, despite his inner turmoil, tried to remain calm, but as soon as he spoke his first words, their conversation quickly took a sinister turn. "I need to open an account," Jeremy said, trying to sound confident. Phillips, without taking his eyes off the screen, cut him off rudely. "Do you really think you can afford that? People like you are the only ones here who get in the way of work," he said with disdain, casting a sideways glance at Jeremy, full of hatred. At that moment, Jeremy felt his heart sink, and a voice inside him whispered, "Go away." But he stayed. For years he had been fighting against prejudice, against a fear that had crept up on him like a shadow. "Please, I just want to open an account," he repeated, but the words were like a whisper in a storm. Phillips, hurt, suddenly looked up and, looking at Jeremy, broke into a smile that was more like a sneer. "How long does it take you to realize you don't belong here?" he said, turning his attention to the people around him, who began to whisper and laugh. Jeremy felt a hot wave of shame wash over his face. There was a dark mirth ringing around him. People were looking at him with bewilderment, as if he were some kind of entertainment that had happened in their boring day. With every word Phillips spoke, the humiliation grew more acute. "You don't want to be seen, do you? This place is not for the likes of you. You know this is a bank, not a public restroom," he said, and laughter echoed throughout the room. Jeremy felt anger boiling in his chest, but he couldn't allow himself to give in. He knew any response he gave would only make things worse. He clenched his fists to suppress the surge of rage and humiliation. His eyes were blazing. This white manager had no right to judge him, but Phillips's words were like a death sentence. Ignoring the fact that the other customers continued to laugh and whisper, Jeremy felt his inner world crumbling. He became afraid not only for himself, but also for those who could also become victims of this hatred. The feeling of hopelessness began to grow, and with it came the realization that such injustice could not go unpunished. Just as he was about to pluck up the courage to leave, Phillips added with particular contempt, "Well, I think you had better leave this bank. I don't want your kind here. Come back when you've learned some manners." That was the last straw. Jeremy turned and walked past the laughter and whispers, out the door, feeling a black curtain of despair and rage creeping over his soul. That night he couldn't sleep. Images of humiliation haunted him. How could this man, with his cold, merciless face, so easily tear his dignity to pieces? His thoughts wandered into the dark corners of his mind until an idea was born, a plan that he hoped would restore his lost respect. The next day, as the sun rose above the horizon, Jeremy knew what he would do. He had gathered all his resolve, focused on one goal, to take back what had been taken from him. He had a plan that would make this bank a witness to his strength and resilience. He was not going to accept humiliation, and now he felt a wave of readiness for action rising. His heart pounded as he strode back to the bank, full of determination. The secrets he was about to uncover and the power that had awakened within him were his weapons. In that moment, he knew he had come for more than just justice, he had come for vengeance. Jeremy stood outside the bank doors again, his heart pounding in his chest. This time he was ready. Every step he took reminded him that his pride and dignity were on the line. As he walked in, the air inside was as heavy as it had been the day he had been humiliated. People continued to come in and out, but their stares no longer filled him with fear. He knew he had to act. Philip sat in his usual place, unaware that Jeremy had returned. His expression was indifferent, as if he was already preparing for another routine. But as Jeremy approached, Phillips looked up, and a grin flickered in his eyes, as if he was anticipating a new sight. "You're here again?" he said sarcastically. "Thought you found a better place in life?" Jeremy felt the blood rush to his cheeks, but he was not going to give in. "I need to open an account, Mr. Phillips. I have all the documents," he replied, trying to sound calm. Phillips burst into a laugh that left no room for hope. "Papers? Really? Maybe you should show me how to behave in polite company first. I don't think you're polite enough for this bank," he said, his voice full of contempt. Gathering his strength, Jeremy continued, "I'm here to conduct a routine transaction. I will not tolerate your insults." Phillips leaned on the table, crossed his arms and said mockingly, "Oh, so we have a hero here. Do you really think anyone will listen to you? I'm sure your friends won't tell you that this is no place for your kind. We have rules here, and you don't fit them." There were several customers standing nearby, their curious glances growing like a pack of hungry wolves. Jeremy felt their eyes piercing his soul, while malicious whispers filled the space around him. "You're just a typical example, coming from nowhere, with empty pockets, hoping for the best," Phillips continued, his voice growing louder. "Tell me, how do you plan to rise in our world? This is no place for you." Gathering all his resolve, Jeremy glanced around, his anger welling up inside him. "I came here to do what I need to do. I'm not asking for your favor, and I won't let you do this to me. I deserve respect, just like any other customer." Phillips raised an eyebrow. "Respect? Respect for what? For just standing here trying to prove your worth? Don't make me laugh. You're just distracting us from the real work." At that moment, Jeremy felt a cold breath of fear wash over him. He knew he had no support. The feeling of loneliness and betrayal was weighing on him. He thought about his friends, his family, how they had supported him during difficult times. He couldn't let this situation end like this. "I'm not afraid of you, Phillips. I'm not letting you and your racist views run my life," he said, his voice louder and more confident. The manager's laughter stopped and he narrowed his eyes fiercely. "You should know that people like you have no right to raise your voice in our company. You are only a guest, and you should know your place," he said, the last words uttered with bright malice. Jeremy felt fear and rage merging in his mind. He wanted to lunge at him, but he knew he had to hold on. He couldn't let his emotions get the better of him. Suddenly an idea popped into his head, a way to regain control of the situation, to get revenge for all the humiliation. "I didn't come just for the bill," he said, his voice quiet but confident. "I came to show you that your prejudices and your hatred are not what should define my path, and I will do everything I can to make sure that not only you, but everyone around you understands that." Phillips stared at him curiously, his gaze darting between bewilderment and contempt, but Jeremy already knew this was just the beginning. He wasn't going to leave until he got his way. Jeremy turned and walked out of the bank, leaving behind an atmosphere of tension and confusion. His anger was directed not just at Phillips, but at the system that allowed this to happen. With each passing second, he realized more and more that returning to that bank was not just a matter of revenge. It was a matter of honor, and a flame had been lit in his soul that he would use to challenge not just one manager, but an entire system that supported racism and bias. He knew he couldn't do it alone and he would need allies, and that was the beginning of his journey to justice. Jeremy walked out of the bank, leaving behind a silence full of confusion and discontent. He felt the rage filling him, and every step echoed in his heart like a hammer on an anvil. Images of humiliation continued to plague his mind. The next day he returned to the bank, determined to finish what he had started. The atmosphere inside was tense. People continued to come and go, but now their eyes were wary. Perhaps they had heard about the incident the day before. Phillips was back at his desk, and when his gaze fell on Jeremy, his face broke into a wicked smile. Well, if I don't go back to my world, are you here again? He said sarcastically, drawing the attention of the other customers. Ready to repeat your complaints yet? Or have you come to show your stupidity again? Jeremy clenched his fists but didn't answer. He knew that was what he was waiting for. Phillips was enjoying the moment. He always had power over those he thought were weaker. It was as if he held the fate of everyone who walked through the doors of his bank in his hands. You know, I think you've been here too long, Phillips continued, raising his voice to be heard. Perhaps you'd better leave before they start asking unpleasant questions about your visit. Some of the clients began to whisper, pointing at Jeremy. He heard the words lack of discipline and why did he even come here? It was like a cold shower that went straight to his bones. Every whisper, every mocking word sent new waves of fear and humiliation through him. Listen, Phillips, he said, trying to pull himself together. I didn't come here to listen to your nonsense. I want to open an account, and you have no right to insult me. I'm a human being, and I demand respect. Phillips laughed with satisfaction. Respect? You demand respect when you don't respect yourself? That's ridiculous. You think anyone is going to listen to you screaming about equality and truth? You're here to be a spectacle. Don't you realize that your words mean nothing? Nearby, several customers began to laugh openly, and it tore at Jeremy. He felt his pride melting away. Pain and fear merged, creating a lump in his throat. But something inside him began to waver. Anger and determination began to prevail over humiliation. You're wrong, Phillips. I know I'm worth a lot, even if you don't see it, he said, raising his voice, his words like a challenge. Phillips narrowed his eyes, his expression changing to look at Jeremy with open contempt. What are you going to do? Say it even louder? Please don't make me laugh. You'll never change the way people treat you. You need to learn to be in your place. Jeremy's heart began to beat faster and fear stirred inside him. He knew that he was being watched, that he was the object of ridicule and contempt. But at the same time, he knew that he could not give up. He remembered his parents, who had fought for their rights, for their fight, and he felt that this was not just his fight. I will not let you define me, he said, looking the manager in the eye with confidence. You cannot humiliate me, no matter how hard you try. I have come here not only for myself, but for those who suffer from such an insult. I will fight for justice. Phillips couldn't help but laugh. Wow, like anyone would listen to you. You think you're a hero. Of course, but trust me, you're just another victim who doesn't know when to walk away. The crowd around them continued to watch, and Jeremy felt fear and humiliation creep into his heart. But in that moment, he also felt a strength he had never known he had. This wasn't just a fight for a bank account, it was a battle against the system, against people like Phillips. As Jeremy was about to leave, Phillips suddenly said loudly, I hope you don't plan on coming back here when you're done with your pathetic attempts. This bank is not for the likes of you. Every word the manager said cut like a knife, and Jeremy paused for a moment. In that moment, he realized that he had to do more than just stand in that bank and fight for his rights. He had to use this hatred as fuel for his anger, to show that no humiliation would go without consequences. He turned and walked out the door, fists clenched. He knew now that his fight was just beginning, and he was not alone in this battle. His place was not in the shadow of fear, but in the light of justice. As Jeremy walked out of the bank, the cold air hit him in the face, but a fire was burning inside him. He knew he couldn't let this humiliation go unpunished. He walked back to his car, a plan forming in his mind, and he knew he had to act. The next day, having gathered his strength, he returned to the bank again. Inside, the atmosphere was even more tense. Phillips was again sitting at his desk, but this time his smile was even more smug. It was as if he was waiting for Jeremy, anticipating a new portion of humiliation. Oh, look who's back. You still expect respect? He said mockingly. Informed glances went up to the customers in line. What do you want, boy? Repeat your speech about fairness? Jeremy bit his lip to keep his anger from showing. I came to finish the job, he said, trying to keep his voice calm. I won't tolerate your insults. Phillips began waving his arms slowly, as if it were a performance. Everyone, pay attention. We have our little fighter for justice here. Please don't laugh. He might get offended. Do you really think your vote will make a difference? The customers began to whisper. Some even laughed. Jeremy felt his heart beat in unison with the laughter, as if this was not his life, but just some kind of show. But he was not going to remain in the shadows. I came here to open an account, he said, trying to remain calm. "And if you don't want to help me, I can go to your boss." Phillips laughs again, his voice like a poisonous arrow. "Your superiors? Do you really think they'll trust you? You're just another victim of your own delusions. The bank isn't interested in your problems. You don't even have a free pass to stay here. You should know that your skin color doesn't make you special." It was as if he had punched Jeremy in the face. All the humiliations he had faced merged into one powerful sensation. He felt his pride being destroyed, but at the same time, a new flame was being lit inside him. This was not just a fight over scores. It was a fight for his identity, for his place in this world. "You have no right to say that," he said, his voice growing louder. "I am a human being, and you cannot humiliate me just because I am a different color. That does not make me any less worthy of respect." Phillips turned to the crowd, his eyes glittering. "Oh, look at him. We have a vulnerable creature here, trying to elicit pity. Don't you realize that your skin is your prison? You'll never be equal." Some customers started laughing, and it was like a razor blade had been stabbed into Jeremy. He felt his pride crumbling, but at the same time he remembered his ancestors who had fought for their rights. He knew he couldn't give up. "You don't understand what it means to fight," he said, his voice quiet but confident. "I'm not asking you to understand. I just want you to know that I will not be your victim. I will fight for myself and for all those who cannot speak." Phillips laughed again, and his laugh sounded like a triumphant cry. "The problem is, you have no right to fight. You'll just continue to walk in this cycle of humiliation, and I'll enjoy every time you fall." The crowd around them grew, and Jeremy felt isolated in this ocean of ridicule and contempt. He was afraid, but he knew he had to continue. He had to show that this wasn't just his fight. "I'm not leaving," he said, raising his head. "I know this is wrong. I'm not alone in this fight, and I will do everything I can to change this system." Phillips, clearly frustrated, responded angrily, "Change the system? You're just dreaming, boy. This is a banking system, not a hobby group. You should know your place." And in that moment, Jeremy knew he couldn't just stand there and wait. He had to find support. He had to unite those who were also experiencing this humiliation. He turned and walked out of the bank without looking back, his heart beating in unison with his determination. He knew this was just the beginning of his fight, and he would fight until he got justice. As Jeremy walked out of the bank, his heart was pounding with anger. He knew he had to act, and he decided to return with a new plan. The next day, he stepped into the bank branch again, and this time his resolve was unwavering. As soon as he entered, Phillips stared at him with a smirk. "Look who's here. I hope your expectations aren't too high. It seems that way with you." His voice was full of mockery, and the customers began to whisper among themselves, anticipating the new spectacle. "I didn't come to be mocked, Phillips. I came to finish the job," Jeremy said, trying to remain calm. Phillips stood up, crossing his arms over his chest. "What are you going to do? Try to prove to me that you have a right to be here? You're just another pathetic loser who doesn't have the courage to tell the truth." The crowd around them grew, and Jeremy felt his fear creeping up on him again. But this time, he was prepared. He wasn't going to be indifferent to this situation. "I'm not a pathetic loser. I'm a human being, and I deserve respect," Phillips said contemptuously, stepping closer. "You don't even realize that your skin defines you. You're not human, you're just an object of ridicule." Jeremy felt the adrenaline rush through his body. He knew he had to do something. Phillips, seeing that Jeremy wasn't going to give in, came closer and whispered, "You know that none of my colleagues will support you, right? You're just here for fun. You can't beat a system that's always been against you, like a match in a powder keg." These words caused an explosion of emotion in Jeremy. He stepped forward, his voice growing louder. "If you think I'm going to give in without a fight, you're sadly mistaken. I'm going to fight until I get what I want." Phillips chuckled, a malicious glint in his eyes. "Well, if that's how you want it, let's see who's right. Or are you just afraid you can't handle reality?" The customers began to whisper, and at that moment Phillips suddenly stepped forward, pushing Jeremy. "Get your filthy hands off me. You have no right to be here." Jeremy, feeling the anger welling up inside him, reacted instantly. He shoved Phillips back, and the air grew tense. "Don't you dare touch me. You think you can act like I'm your property?" The crowd around them began to get rowdy and people were backing away, watching the conflict unfold. Phillips, glaring at him with disdain, began calling people to him. "Look at that loser. He doesn't know when to stop. Someone needs to teach him. I may be a loser, but I won't let you insult me, Jeremy said, his voice growing louder. He felt his anger and fear give way to determination. He knew this was his opportunity. Phillips, realizing he was losing control, stepped closer, his face inches from Jeremy's. You don't know anything about real wrestling. You're just a loud boy who doesn't know what to do. Get out of here before it's too late. The manager's words were like a slap in the face, and Jeremy felt his patience wearing thin. He raised his fists, preparing for a fight. I'm not leaving until you understand that your hatred will not stop me. At that moment, Jeremy lunged at Phillips, and a dull thud echoed through the air. Both men were on the floor, and the conflict flared up again. The crowd's shouts and laughter mingled with the noise of the struggle, and Jeremy felt his fear fading, giving way to rage and determination. Phillips, trying to break free, shouted, "You're not going to get anywhere. Boy, you're just another victim." "I am not a victim. I am a man, and I will fight for what is right," Jeremy replied, trying to stand up. He knew he had to show that even in this humiliation there was strength, and he was ready to fight. The crowd around them grew, some trying to separate them, others just watching this breathtaking spectacle. This was his time, his moment, and he was not going to waste it. In that moment, he realized that fighting for his honor was not just his own battle, but a battle for all those who had ever faced hatred and prejudice. Jeremy and Phillips rolled to the floor, locked in a struggle, each looking for an opportunity to turn the tables. Jeremy felt his body fill with adrenaline as he began throwing punches, trying to break free of the hold, but Phillips was full of hatred and rage. "You can never defeat, black-haired," Phillips cried out, trying to push Jeremy. Every word the manager said was like a sharp blade piercing Jeremy's heart. "You think your hatred makes you stronger?" he growled, clenching his fists. "You are just fear and weakness trying to suppress those who cannot fight back." Phillips, suddenly furious, fell on Jeremy with force, pinning him to the floor. "You should go back to where you came from. You have no right to be here. I am the one who makes the decisions, and you are nothing but a trinket in my world," he screamed, his face contorted with rage. As if blinded by hatred, Phillips began to hit Jeremy again, and Jeremy, feeling blow after blow raining down on him, gathered his strength to stand. I will fight for myself and for everyone who has ever suffered from your hatred," he screamed, struggling to raise his hands to protect his face. At this point, several customers approached them. Some tried to separate them, but Phillips, clearly unwilling to give in, continued to hurl insults. "You have to understand that he is not your friend. He is just darkness that consumes everything around him. Do you really want to be around this nobody?" The crowd seemed to be having a hard time keeping from laughing and jeering. Someone in the audience said, "Look at him. He can't even stand up for himself." This only spurred Phillips on, who began to jeer even more. "You think you can change anything? All this talk about equality and fairness is just talk. You're worthless. You don't even have a life of your own," he said with disdain, trying to knock Jeremy off his feet again. At that moment, Jeremy felt his anger and fear mix, and it gave him strength. "I'm standing on my own 2 feet because I'm a human being, and you're just an evil manager who doesn't understand what it means to respect others," he said, throwing Phillips off of him. Jeremy jumped to his feet and, seeing Phillips losing his balance, used the moment to deliver a powerful blow. Phillips, feeling the force of the blow, staggered back, but his evil gaze was full of fury. "You think this is going to help you? You're just another guy trying to prove something, but you're really just a toy in this game we're playing," Phillips said, his voice filled with anger. "I won't let you win." Jeremy lunged at Phillips again, and the sounds of a struggle filled the air. Blows, shouts, muffled clashes. A crowd gathered around, and everyone was a witness to this emotional conflict. "You can't go on. You can't stop this," Jeremy screamed, using all his courage to strike again, feeling everything inside him rage. "I will fight for everyone who has ever faced prejudice and hatred." Phillips, feeling his strength begin to fade, rose to his feet, but Jeremy was not going to stop. He knew that this fight was not just his personal struggle. It was a battle for everyone who had ever experienced humiliation and prejudice. "You will never change, and your dirty words can't stop me," Jeremy screamed, each blow becoming more powerful. His anger and determination grew like a flame, and he knew he couldn't let this continue. Phillips, realizing he was losing, charged at Jeremy again, but he was ready. "You can't break me!" Jeremy screamed, and at that moment he felt that his fight had become not only personal but also collective, and he was not going to give up. Each blow was not only an attempt to defend himself, but also a cry from everyone who had ever felt humiliated. And when Jeremy stood in front of Phillips, he knew that this was his chance not only for himself, but for everyone who believes in equality and justice. Jeremy and Phillips, both full of rage, continued to fight, and the tension in the air became almost palpable. Every word the manager said pierced Jeremy like arrows, and he felt his confidence begin to waver under the weight of humiliation. "You just play real life, Black," Phillips shouted, pushing Jeremy and forcing him to lose balance. "I won't give up," Jeremy shouted, rising to his feet, but his voice sounded less confident than before. Phillips, feeling his strength, came closer, his eyes glittering with malice. "Look at you, you can't even fight properly. You have no strength, no brains, you're just another victim of your skin. If you were born white, maybe you'd have a chance, but with this skin color, you're just destined for shame." His words sounded like venom, and Jeremy felt the rage inside him flare up again. "You're wrong, I'm not a disgrace, I'm a man," Jeremy barked, feeling the fear fade away, replaced by anger. "I'll fight because that's what makes me a man." Phillips chuckled, continuing to taunt Jeremy. "A human being? You're nothing but a cheap knockoff. Do you think your struggle matters? All this talk about equality is just talk. You're just being ridiculous in your attempts to prove your worth." The customers around them began to whisper, and Jeremy, feeling their eyes on him, felt his heart skip a beat again. "What do they think of me? What if they believe this bastard's words?" The thought flashed through his mind. Phillips continued, pointing to the spectators. "They're just watching you like you're a loser. You can't even handle yourself, let alone fight for your black friends." Every word was like a knife stabbing into Jeremy. He clenched his fists, trying to concentrate, but doubt was already creeping into his thoughts. "You can't break me," he screamed, trying to suppress the fear inside. "Break? Do you really think this is a fight? This is not a fight. This is just a little show for me. You are just a cheap comedy trying to impress the audience." Phillips laughed hoarsely, and the crowd around them began to join in his laughter. "Look at this loser, he's trying to fight me. How ridiculous," Phillips commented, his voice like thunder amid the jeers. "Perhaps you want us to put on a pyrotechnic show for you? Or perhaps it would be better to just go back to your miserable life and learn to accept your place in this world?" he continued, leaving Jeremy no chance to respond. "You don't know what it means to fight," Jeremy shouted, his voice full of rage. "I fight for myself, for those who suffer from your words." "Fight? You, boy, can't even hold back your tears when I tell you the truth. You're just another specimen who needs to know his place." Phillips chuckled shrilly, and his words sounded like blows that hit Jeremy in the heart. "Everyone here can see what a coward you are. You can't stand up like a real fortress. You're just dust under my feet." Phillips stepped closer, his voice threatening, and Jeremy felt his confidence waver again. "I'm not dust, I'm a man, and I'm going to fight," Jeremy shouted, trying to muster all his strength to keep the humiliation from consuming him. "You can't stop me with your words." "Words? You don't even realize that they're just letters. You have no right to talk about fighting when your life isn't worth a dime," Phillips said, his tone becoming even more mocking. "You shouldn't forget that you don't matter in this world. You won't even be around when this whole circus is over." Jeremy felt his inner world crumble, but at the same moment he remembered his family, his friends who were also struggling with prejudice. "I'm not alone, I'm part of something bigger, and you can't break me," he shouted with a force that resembled fire. "Yeah, come on, raise your voice. You just proved that you're nothing but a cry without substance. You're still going to lose in the end," Phillips continued, his words coming out like sharp blows. The customers in the room began to whisper, and Jeremy knew he couldn't give up. He raised his head, renewing his purpose. He knew he wasn't just fighting for himself, but for everyone who had ever been bullied or racist. In that moment, he vowed to fight until the end. The fight between Jeremy and Phillips was heating up again, and the tension in the air was growing thicker. With every blow and every derogatory word that Phillips uttered, a sense of desperation grew in Jeremy's heart. He knew that this fight wasn't just about him, it was a clash of two worlds, and he felt the dark clouds of hatred gathering around him. "You don't even know what it's like to be on top," Phillips shouted, taking another swipe at Jeremy. You'll never understand what it's like to be a man, to be respected. You're just another toy who thinks he can take on a real man." With every word, Jeremy felt anger boiling inside him, but at the same time, something fragile was breaking in his chest. He remembered his mother, who always told him that he was special, that he should be proud of his heritage. But Philip's words rang so harshly true. "You're worthless and your life doesn't matter," Phillips continued, his voice filled with malice. "You're just a blip in a story that no one will remember." With every word he spoke, it was as if something inside Jeremy was cracking. "You can't say things like that." He tried to answer, but his voice was shaking with emotion. "I'm a human being, and I have dreams and hopes like everyone else." "Dreams? Hopes?" Phillips just chuckled. "You don't even know what that means. You're just a shadow wandering around in this world. Your dreams are as dead as you are." The customers around him began to gather closer, and Jeremy felt their gazes full of judgment and uncertainty. He noticed that some of them were looking at him with pity, which was even more humiliating. He was not just a participant in a fight, he was an object of ridicule and contempt. "Why are you doing this? Why are you humiliating me?" Jeremy forced out, his voice quiet, as if he had lost all his strength. "I just want to be respected." "Respect? Respect is something you'll never get as long as you stay the way you are," Phillips yelled, and there was hatred in his voice. "Listen, if you had any pride, you would never have come here to show off." At that moment, Jeremy remembered his family, how they suffered, how they fought for their dreams in this world full of hatred and prejudice. His heart was filled with bitterness and hopelessness, and he suddenly realized that this was not just a fight, this was a clash of his inner world, his hopes and dreams. Phillips continued to press, his words full of contempt. "You're just a comedian trying to entertain an audience. You don't even realize that all this fighting is just your desperate attempt to be important." Jeremy, feeling the pressure building inside him, fell to his knees. He could no longer bear the humiliation that rained down on him like a rain of contempt. "I didn't mean any harm. I just wanted to be understood," he sobbed, tears streaming down his cheeks. The crowd froze, and at that moment a resounding thud was heard as Phillips, seeing his weakness, attacked with fury. "Look at you, boy! You can't even stand up for yourself. I knew you couldn't take it." The blow wasn't just physical, it was emotional. Jeremy felt his entire world crumble around him, and with every word Phillips spoke, he realized that maybe he really was nothing. This fear, this desperation, this desire to be accepted, it all washed over him like waves on the shore. "You have no right to dream until you learn to respect real people," Phillips continued, and each blow he landed left scars not only on his body, but also on his soul. "You're just another victim who will be forgotten as soon as you're gone." At that moment, when Jeremy finally lost all his strength and was left on his knees, he remembered his family, how they fought for him, for his future. He realized that he could not let this bastard take away his dignity. He raised his head and, despite all the humiliation, said, "I will fight. I will not let you take away my hope." But Phillips just smirked. "Hope? You're ridiculous. Hope won't save you when you're at rock bottom. You don't even know what it's like to really fight." The crowd waited in anticipation, and this moment was the culmination of everything, a clash of not just bodies but souls, hopes and fears. Jeremy, feeling the weight of his humiliation, knew that this was not just a fight, this was his chance to show that even in the darkest hour, hope can flare like fire, but he knew that an even harder fight lay ahead, and he was willing to pay any price to protect his dignity. Jeremy looked up, determined, but the feeling of hopelessness washed over him like a cold fog. He was on his knees, his body exhausted, his soul filled with bitterness. Phillips, like a predator, knew he had found his prey, and he continued to advance, his face twisted in malice. "Look at you, black man, you're nothing but a clown trying to pass off his fantasy as reality," Phillips shouted, his voice a thunderclap in the silence. The crowd gathered around him, only taking up his taunts, and Jeremy felt their gazes piercing him like 1,000 sharp needles. "You can't even stand up for yourself. You're just a pathetic loser who came here to be humiliated," Phillips continued, squatting down and looking at Jeremy with disdain. "You'll always be at the bottom, always a victim of your race. Even if you rise up, you'll still be thrown back." Jeremy, feeling the terror rising inside him, tried to rise, but his legs wouldn't obey him. Not only was he physically defeated, he felt his spirit slowly crumbling under the onslaught of those words. "You don't know what fighting is," he screamed, but his voice was weak and unconvincing. "Oh, yes, I know what it's like to see you struggle with your fear. You can't run away from your destiny." Phillips leaned closer, his eyes gleaming with malicious glee. "You're just proving that you're unimportant to anyone, and your dreams are just a way to escape reality." With every word Phillips spoke, Jeremy felt anger boiling inside him, but he knew that every effort was in vain. "Why can't you just leave me alone?" he asked, his voice shaking with emotion. "I've never hurt anyone." Phillips just smirked, his face filled with malice. "You think you can just come here and demand respect? How can you expect anyone to ever respect you when you act like an animal?" His words were filled with contempt, and Jeremy felt his heart squeezed in a vice with every sentence. The crowd watched their struggle like a grim audience at a theatrical performance. Every laugh, every whisper cut like a knife blade. "Look at that loser, he can't even stand up." A mocking voice from the crowd spurred Phillips on. "Look at him, he's so defenseless." Phillips continued, standing up and pointing at Jeremy. "You do realize that all you've done is let everyone see how worthless you are, right?" Every word Phillips said was like poison, slowly eating away at Jeremy's confidence. He began to feel like he was more than just a victim of the situation. He was a symbol of prejudice, abuse, and hatred. It was hard to accept, but in that moment he realized that the fight he was in wasn't just physical, it was a fight against an entire world full of hatred and prejudice. "I will not give up," Jeremy cried, rising to his knees, but his voice was becoming increasingly uncertain. "I will fight for myself, for everyone who has suffered such humiliation." Phillips just chuckled, leaning towards him again. "Fight? With whom? With yourself? You're not capable of that." His voice was full of sarcasm. "Everyone can see that you're just a defenseless victim, and no one can take you seriously." Jeremy, struggling against the tide of humiliation, tried to stand up again, but it was difficult. His body refused to obey, and as he realized this, he felt despair creeping up on him. Weakness and humiliation were becoming his constant companions, and he knew that his fight was not just a clash with Phillips, it was a war with himself. "You just confirmed that you don't know what real life is. No one takes you seriously, and you'll always be at the bottom," Phillips said again, and his words, like a bolt from the blue, shattered Jeremy's last hopes. Jeremy, on the edge, felt his pride begin to crack at the seams. He didn't want to be a victim, but in this moment, amidst the ridicule and contempt, he didn't know how to get out of this abyss. "Pull yourself together, Jeremy," he thought, but inside him there was only emptiness. This fight had become more than just a battle, it had become his tragedy, and he was beginning to understand that sometimes even the strongest of spirits can find themselves defenseless in a world filled with hatred. Phillips, seeing his confusion, could not contain his joy. "Look how broken he is. You can't even cope with humiliation. How funny." His voice sounded like a fist, which was falling again and again on Jeremy, who, in turn, felt himself losing himself. The crowd roared with laughter, and Jeremy felt every word they said consume him. He could no longer hear his own thoughts. He was simply a victim surrounded by hatred. "I can't go on like this," he whispered softly, his heart clenching in despair. Phillips, watching Jeremy fall into the abyss, paused for a moment, savoring the moment. He knew he had more than just a victory in his hands. He had broken a man who was fighting for his identity and dignity. "Remember this moment, boy. You are a victim, and you will never be in this world." With every word he spoke, Jeremy felt the world around him begin to fall apart. He was left not just defeated, but the embodiment of everything that people who suffered from hatred and prejudice had ever faced. And in that moment, he realized that the struggle was not only his own tragedy, but the tragedy of everyone who had ever felt the pain of injustice. Out of the blue, a spark of determination flared in Jeremy's mind. He couldn't afford to be a victim. Every disparaging look and every insulting word Phillips threw at him became a push for him to stand up. He wouldn't just accept this injustice. An angry energy began to boil inside him, and he realized that this was his chance to change not only his own fate, but the fate of those who suffered at the hands of racism. "You can't break me," Jeremy said loudly, his voice sounding more confident than ever before. He stood up, and although his body was still shaking slightly from the pain, there was a fire of determination in his eyes. "I will not tolerate your insults and humiliation." Phillips, not expecting such a reaction, was dumbfounded. "What are you going to do? Cry on the corner? You're not capable of anything more." His mockery sounded in unison with the contemptuous looks of the crowd. "No, I'm going to sue you," Jeremy replied, and every word was like a slap in Phillips's face. The crowd froze in anticipation, as if they realized that Jeremy had decided to change the course of the story. "You're not serious, are you?" Phillips asked, grinning ironically. "Who are you going to sue? The guy who shows you how worthless you are? That's ridiculous." Jeremy clenched his fists, trying not to let the fear take hold of him again. "I will sue not only you, but the bank as well. I will not remain silent while people like you use their power to humiliate and oppress. I will tell my story." The crowd gathered around began to whisper, and Jeremy saw some faces looking at him with sympathy. Maybe his words really did resonate with people. "I'm not alone. I know that many people like me have suffered from racism and humiliation," he continued, his voice becoming more and more confident. "What I'm experiencing is not just a personal tragedy, it's a disease of our society." Phillips, noticing that control was beginning to slip away from him, tried to regain control of the situation. "You can never win. I'm the man who runs this place, and no one will believe your lies." His voice became increasingly aggressive. "I'm not lying," Jeremy screamed, his emotions running high. "I'm going to tell my truth, and you can't silence me. We live in a world where every story matters, and I won't let you ruin mine." With that, he turned to the crowd, his voice filled with determination. "If I win, it will be a win for all of us. I'm not just fighting for myself. I'm fighting for everyone who has suffered from bias and racism." The crowd began to applaud, and Jeremy felt the support of those around him give him strength. He knew the fight would be tough, but now he had allies, people who could be a part of his story. "You don't even know what real fighting is," Phillips said again, but his confidence was already cracking at the seams. "You can't break the system. The system needs to change," Jeremy replied, his voice strong and confident. "I will give everything I have to show that people like you have no right to humiliate people just because they look different." Finally, Jeremy gathered his things and headed for the exit, feeling like he was leaving behind not only the humiliation, but also his old self. He decided that the next time he returned, he would not just be a victim, but a fighter, ready to defend his rights and the rights of others. He knew he had a long road ahead of him, full of obstacles and difficulties. He was already thinking about how to find a lawyer who would support his case. He wanted his voice to be heard not only at the bank, but also in court. He didn't just want to get revenge on Phillips, he wanted to change the situation, to make it fair for everyone. With each step, his confidence grew. He could already imagine his lawyer talking about his experiences, how he had been a victim of racism, how he had been humiliated and insulted. He knew that this would not only be his battle, but also the battle of those who could not speak out. Finally, Jeremy stepped outside and felt the fresh air that seemed to fill him with energy. He took a deep breath, and this was the beginning of a new chapter in his life. He knew there would be challenges ahead, but now he was ready to overcome them. There was a fire of hope burning inside him, and he knew that his story was just beginning. The trial began a few weeks after that fateful day at the bank. Jeremy stood outside the courtroom, his heart pounding like a drum in his chest, giving him strength. He had never thought he would get to this point, a point where his voice, his truth, would matter. In the dock sat the bank manager, Phillips, his face full of contempt and indignation. He had clearly not expected his actions to lead to a trial, and that fact only added to his anger. The courtroom was packed with people, friends supporting Jeremy and casual spectators eager to see how this conflict would play out. Jeremy's attorney, a seasoned civil rights lawyer, began the trial by presenting evidence and witnesses. He laid out the case with restraint but conviction, showing how Phillips had used his power to humiliate and insult Jeremy, using racial bias to assert his dominance. "This case is not just about Jeremy," the lawyer said, his voice clear and loud. "This case is about a system that allows people like Phillips to continue to oppress and humiliate others simply because of the color of their skin. We have to put an end to this racism." At this point, Jeremy felt a sense of pride and strength building inside him. His story wasn't just personal, it was part of a larger fight for justice. He knew his actions could make a difference in society, and that thought gave him strength. When it was Jeremy's turn to speak, he stood up slowly, walking across the courtroom to the witness stand. His heart was pounding, but he composed himself and looked at Phillips in the dock. There was something sinister in his eyes, but Jeremy knew he had power now. "I never thought I'd be here in court," he began, his voice firm. "I've been humiliated and insulted simply because of the color of my skin. I came to the bank to get help, but instead I was met with hatred and prejudice. I want everyone to know that this will not be tolerated." The crowd in the courtroom was silent and expectant, and Jeremy continued, "Phillips told me that I was worthless, that I was not worthy of respect, that I would never be able to rise. But I am here to prove him wrong. I am not a victim, I am a fighter, and we all have to fight for our rights." When he finished, the courtroom erupted in applause. It wasn't just applause, it was a wave of support that lifted Jeremy above his fears and doubts. The floor was given to Phillips' lawyer, who, as expected, tried to discredit Jeremy. "This is simply an attempt at revenge," he began, his voice sounding nervous. "My client was only trying to do his job at the bank. He had no intention of insulting Mr. Jeremy." But Jeremy's lawyer quickly responded with evidence, video footage, testimony from other clients and employees, that confirmed Phillips had used racist remarks. The atmosphere in the courtroom grew tense, and more people realized that this was not just a case between two people, it was a challenge to the system. Finally, the judge, a wise and experienced woman, announced her decision. "The court finds that Phillips did engage in racist language and conduct, and that such conduct is unacceptable in our society. I sentence him to 1 year in prison and a fine to be used to support anti-racism programs." The judge's words seemed to pierce the air. Jeremy felt his heart fill with relief and joy. Phillips, who had looked confident before, now turned pale. Defeat was written on his face, and he finally understood that his actions had consequences. The crowd in the courtroom erupted in applause and cheers. Jeremy, feeling joy welling up inside him, realized that this wasn't just a victory for him, it was a victory for everyone who had ever faced bias and racism. As he left the courtroom, his friends and supporters surrounded him, congratulating him on this important victory. Jeremy knew his fight was not over, but he now had the strength, support and confidence that he could overcome any obstacle. "Thank you all for your support," he said, his voice shaking with emotion. "This victory belongs to us all. Let's continue the fight for justice and equality." And while he had a long road ahead of him, Jeremy knew his story was just beginning. He was ready to continue fighting for the rights of those who, like him, had suffered from racism and bias. He became a symbol of hope and resilience, ready to inspire others to raise their voices and fight for their rights. The court decision was a real turning point in Jeremy's life. Not only did he win the case, but he also gained a confidence he had never had before. Every step he took after the trial was filled with new meaning and purpose. There were many opportunities ahead. After the trial, Jeremy decided to dedicate his life to fighting racism and bias. He began speaking at public events, sharing his story and inspiring others who had experienced similar situations. His voice became more than just an individual one, it became part of a larger fight for justice. Soon he was invited to schools and universities where he shared his experiences with young people, encouraging them to understand the importance of fighting for equality. Jeremy became a symbol of hope, and his story inspired many to speak out when faced with injustice. A few months later, after Phillips was sentenced to prison, Jeremy received an invitation from a local human rights organization. They offered him the opportunity to work as an activist, and he happily accepted. It was a chance to use his experiences to make a real difference in the world. His family and friends were proud of him, and he felt supported every day when he left his house. He understood that his victory in court was not only about him, but about everyone who had ever felt humiliated or insulted. One evening, Jeremy returned home to find an envelope on his desk. He opened it and found a letter from the bank offering him a position as a diversity and inclusion consultant. This was not only a sign of recognition, but also an opportunity to make a real difference in the workplace. He was able to create a program aimed at educating bank employees about racism and bias. Soon after, he organized the first trainings, and his program was warmly received by both employees and customers. He felt that he could make a difference and help others, and this brought him great satisfaction. Jeremy found a new family among his colleagues and like-minded people who were also committed to the cause of equality. He was not alone, he now had a team that shared his vision for a better world. Over time, Jeremy became a well-known activist whose work and achievements were recognized at local and national levels. He received numerous awards for his efforts in the field of human rights and became a role model for many. One day, as he was preparing to give a speech at a big event, he looked around the room full of people ready to listen to his story. He remembered how he had once been humiliated, and how he had stood on the edge of an abyss, but now here he was, with hope and confidence. "We must continue to fight for justice," he began, his voice strong and inspiring. "Each of us has the power to change the world if we take action. We are not just victims, we are fighters." The crowd in the room burst into applause, and Jeremy smiled, knowing that his story was not just his personal victory, but a victory for everyone who had ever felt oppressed. He felt his heart fill with joy and gratitude for all that he had been able to overcome. In the end, Jeremy had not only found his place in life, but had become an important part of a movement that would continue to grow and evolve. He knew there would be new challenges ahead, but he was now ready to face them with confidence, determination, and hope for a brighter future for all. And when he looked at his new friends and allies, he knew he would never be alone again. Together, they continued their fight for equality, creating a world where everyone could live freely and with dignity. Filled with a sense of accomplishment and hope for the future, Jeremy smiled, realizing that his journey had not only changed his life, but also inspired many others. His story became a symbol of the fight for equality, for the rights of every person, regardless of the color of their skin. The lights went out and people started to leave, but there was still a sense of change in the air. Jeremy stepped outside, feeling the breeze on his face, and looked up at the star-studded night sky. He knew there were new challenges and victories ahead, and he was ready to meet them with an open heart. He became convinced that he and others could make a difference in the world. Jeremy realized that every step along the way was not just a step toward justice, but a step toward freedom, love, and equality for all. And with this realization, he set out into a new morning, full of hope, ready to continue his mission and build a world where everyone can live freely and happily. And, dear viewers, what do you think about our story? Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever experienced racism in your life that has affected you or your loved ones? Your stories are very important to us, and we value every word you say. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like this video if you enjoyed it. We are very happy for each of you and thank you for your support. We wish you a good day and a positive mood.